the paper mainly talks about the impact of supply sustainability risk on shareholder value of the targeted companies. The term supplier sustainability risk, let's call that SSR for short. The term SSR is kind of suppliers' unethical behavior, like the use of child labor, the use of forced labor, or pursuing safeguard conditions in their production activities within a supply chain. So in this, we defined the term SSR as the damaging impact that a buying company has to bear when use of their suppliers' unethical behavior become public. So the premise of this paper is like, we argue that those assets are obviously damaging buying companies, but the magnitude of the negative impact might be different depending on the types of SSR. In this, we categorized the SSR into its two types, namely process-related and product-related risk. I think it is quite important to mention that the nature of SSR is conceptually different from what is typically discussed in the literature, known as supply disruption risk. I think SSR normally occurs when buying companies are caught in something that might trigger negative or adverse stakeholder reactions, while supply disruption risk generally arises from operational failures like delays or man-made or natural disasters like factory fire. So I think the key difference between those concepts would be like the matter of business ethics and stakeholder engagement. So for harmful stakeholder reaction to occur, and therefore for SSR to materialize, stakeholders, especially stakeholders outside the supply chain like NGO, community, and media, must notice the corporate scandal and then judge the situation as unacceptable and hold the buying company responsible. Otherwise, SSR will not materialize. And the concept we focus on this today is basically built on the so-called triple bottom line view of sustainability. That is like the combination of social, environmental, and economic perspectives for continuous development. I think this concept originally developed by Elkington in 1997, as I remember, but this concept is now widely applied in the field of operations and supply chain management research. But considering that most of the prior studies in our field have dominantly focused on the planet sides, planet issues like environmental issues or green innovation, so on and so forth, I think in this paper we tackle this one-sided view of sustainability by focusing on the people side of sustainability under the name of SSR. So as I said, SSR, this concept is quite dependent on stakeholder influence. The concept of, so we in this paper considered the notion of stakeholder salience, like a stakeholder whose attributes like power, urgency, and legitimacy might be strong enough to sustain their actions against SSR. Given that premise, we were interested in how stock market reacts to stakeholders' actions against SSR, and this was done by using what is called event study methodology, a useful method for the assessment of financial impact of a corporate certain behavior, in our case, SSR. And also we were interested in how corporate social responsibility or their social performance does mitigate the negative consequences caused by SSR. And this was done by using, developing and testing a regression model, which I will explain a little bit more in detail later. Today, I think we are chronically aware of many corporate scandals, especially the ones happening in the sourcing side of the supply chain. Let's take the Nike's case first. A story about Nike's child labor scandal came out in 1996. As I remember, when Life magazine, the American magazine, published a picture showing an image that little Pakistan boy stitches Nike soccer ball for 60 cents an hour. This unacceptable situation led massive public protest against Nike, causing them serious loss of reputation. But in fact, at that time, Nike's business model, the global sourcing, was not quite different from that of their major competitors like Levi's and Adidas. But the many protests and many non-organization government organizations all across North America and Europe were standing in front of Nike's outlets holding that Pakistan boys pictures. Let's take another example. In this case, I think the Nana Plaza disaster might be one of the symbolic example when it comes to SSR. About 5 years ago, an 8-story building called Rana Plaza collapsed, and this tragic accident killed more than 1,000 garment workers at the time. Located in Dhaka, the capital city of Bangladesh, according to the newspapers, the Rana Plaza building housed a couple of garment factories manufacturing apparel for many Western retail giants such as Walmart, Primark, so on and so forth. So soon after the disaster, those multinational corporations were accused of having little regard for safety working conditions. I think what is more surprising to me is that this deadly disaster came a few months later. More than 100 workers died at a fire in the Tajin factory, also near to the capital city, Dhaka. I think this case is just the tip of the iceberg. More importantly, the concept SSR is not just limited to these kind of process-related risk, process-related scandals, but also they also associate with product-related concerns. For example, let's consider the case for Mattel's lead-tated toys. The toys which were manufactured and supplied by a few suppliers in China a few years ago. This case might be seen as a typical disruption risk, like a quality failure. But according to lots of newspapers and news reports, what happens behind the scene is that those suppliers actually try to cut production costs by using readily available and very cheap materials at the expense of product safety. And also they just did it without telling their buying company, Mattel. So this paper was started with an idea that we now know that these kind of supplier scandals are damaging buying companies, but we still don't know how much of the SSR might be detrimental to buying companies. As we mentioned in the beginning of the paper, there are few studies that nicely address those kind of issues, but the evidence, what we have seen is just anecdotal. So I think now it's quite timely to examine whether SSR are actually damaging buying companies or not. And if it does, how much does damage the buying companies? And if it does not, why? And this research question is one of the main reasons behind the start of the project. We conducted an empirical analysis. Specifically, we conducted event study methodology, the research method, which is quite often used in the field of accounting and finance. The analysis was done by using secondary data sources collected not only through the Wall Street Journal newspaper, but also through what is known as Wharton Research Data Services, where companies' accounting and social responsibility data are available. So, in summary, we searched Wall Street Journal news articles to collect the announcement data, and based on those data, we further collected the company's accounting and CSR related data, both of the data sets available via WRDS, and also to test whether social performance does play a mitigating role or not, we developed a regression model and tested it using also the secondary data collected through CompuStat, WRDS, and using data through many other sources. As expected, we found the negative impact of SSR on shared value of the targeted companies. Specifically, we found that SSR are associated with 1% reduction in shareholder value, which equals to a decline in the market value of more than $1 billion US dollars on average. We also found that the stock market reacts negatively, but not differently, to two types of SSR, process and product related risk. And talking about focusing on the role of social performance, we also found that sample companies' social performance does mitigate the negative consequences by SSR. This is what is academically known as insurance-like protection or insurance-like effects of CSR. But this mechanism only for process-related risk, not for product-related risk. These are the findings we mainly talk about in our research paper. I think there are a couple of implications that sourcing managers might need to consider. First, this study clearly shows that the damage impacts caused by SSR are something we should not underestimate. And despite this fact, many of today's products, especially textile goods, are produced under sepia-like conditions. So findings from this study might provide a relevant reference for sourcing manager, especially for those who consider sourcing from risky suppliers that is very cheap, but potentially subject to SSR. Next, this study also clearly explains why sourcing managers need to think about being good in their sourcing operations. Let's take the Nike's case again. As I said, the company Nike was severely accused of having sepia-like conditions at its overseas suppliers. And those stakeholders' criticism even became stronger when they wrongly responded to them. I think the company would have handled the criticism more effectively if they had kind of higher levels of social performance that could be achieved through building good relationship with those suppliers. And also, it was found that, as I said, insurance like protection, it works for overall SSR and process-related risk, but not for product-related risk. So I think at the time of the product-related risk, maybe the best way to mitigate their negative consequences would be to take responsibility immediately, so that the company can focus on what they do best. Such kind of approach would help relieve stakeholders from negative reactions against product-related risk. And finally, it should be also mentioned that the concept CSR as insurance is only limited to mitigation effects. In other words, what I mean is that companies with CSR as insurance might be able to mitigate the negative consequences caused by stakeholder criticism, but their ability might be limited in terms of eradicating the stakeholder criticism beforehand. So maybe I think sourcing managers need to think about not only pursuing mitigation efforts, but also crafting solutions for SSR, and those solutions must be based on making their sourcing operations truly sustainable, and therefore preventing SSR. So to this end, I think companies should not place cost reduction ahead of selecting suppliers who use unsustainable systems. Also, they at least do think about adopting a little bit collaborative approaches, so that their suppliers better apply with the criteria set by the buying company. As I briefly mentioned earlier, most of the papers in our field mention like SSR related scandals like child labor are quite damaging to buying companies. I mean, damaging buying companies, but they just mention without any evidence or facts. So this paper, I think, is one of the efforts to provide rigorous evidence that might be a good reference for future SSR-related studies. Also, the findings from this study extend the ongoing discussion regarding the insurance-like effects of CSR. What have seen in the literature is that the CSR as insurance, this impact can be different depending on the types of and characteristics of the firms and events. So as I said, in this study, we categorized SSR into two types of events, process and product. And this categorization and the evidence, I think those kind of things would be also a good reference for future studies.